The morning her life shattered forever, Claire Bennett stood in the center of her perfectly decorated wedding hall, watching everything she had built, every plan, every dream, every fragile piece of hope, collapse like glass slipping from shaking hands. The whispers, the stares, the pitying looks all blended into a dull roar as her fiancé's mother announced, with a cold, cutting voice, that the wedding was off. No explanation. No apology. Just a decision made without her, destroying the life she thought she was moments away from stepping into. She felt the air sink out of the room as if the world itself had stopped breathing. Claire didn't cry at first. She simply stood there, numb, still holding her bouquet, her veil trembling from the shock. Only later, alone in the back pew of the empty church, did the tears come, silent, hot, uncontrollable. And it was in that moment, when she felt abandoned by everyone she trusted, that her life took a turn she never saw coming. If you believe in kindness, second chances, or fate stepping in when life falls apart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It truly helps the channel grow and allows more people to enjoy stories like this. Claire stayed in that church long after everyone had left. She didn't want to go home, didn't want to face the shame, the questions, the sympathetic looks. She felt stripped of dignity, stripped of love, stripped of every meaning she once clung to. That was when she heard footsteps, heavy, hesitant, almost apologetic. She looked up and saw him, a man with messy hair, worn-out boots, and a shirt so old it looked as though it had survived several lifetimes. His name, she would later learn, was Jake Rowan. For now, he simply stood there, unsure if she wanted company. He wasn't dressed for a wedding. He didn't even look like he had planned to walk into a church that day. But there was something in his eyes, quiet empathy, the kind that comes from surviving his own storms, that made her chest ache. Jake didn't ask questions. He didn't probe or pity. Instead, he offered her a moment of silence beside someone who wasn't judging her. Claire didn't know why she accepted his presence, but she did. Something about him felt grounding, like he existed outside the chaos of the world she knew, a world that had just rejected her so viciously. As the minutes stretched on, something reckless, maybe broken, within her snapped. The shame of being left at the altar was unbearable. The humiliation of guests whispering about her was suffocating. And the thought of walking out of that church alone was agony. Claire found herself laughing bitterly through tears at the absurdity of it all. "It's supposed to be my wedding day," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Jake's voice was low, almost surprised by the sound of his own words when he responded, "Then maybe it still can be." Claire blinked, startled. She didn't know whether he meant it as a joke or a strange attempt at comfort. But when she looked at him properly, really looked, she saw a man who had nothing yet carried himself with a quiet resolve, someone who had long ago stopped expecting good things for himself but was somehow willing to offer them to someone else. Maybe it was the heartbreak. Maybe it was destiny. Maybe it was sheer desperation. But in that painful, fragile moment, Claire made the most impulsive decision of her life. Her voice was hoarse when she said it, a whisper carried by trembling courage, "Marry me." Jake's eyes widened. The silence between them stretched, sharp and thin. And then, slowly, he nodded. The priest who had lingered to check on Claire was shocked but not resistant. He looked at them as if trying to decipher whether this was madness or fate, but he proceeded, perhaps trusting that sometimes the most broken beginnings lead to the most extraordinary stories. When Claire and Jake stood before each other, she in her lace gown, he in his torn shirt, the contrast felt surreal. Guests who had stayed out of curiosity watched with wide eyes and hushed voices. A whisper passed through the crowd as Claire took a steadying breath. For the first time that day, she felt a strange flicker of control over her life. The vows were simple, awkward even, but sincere. Jake spoke with a quiet tone that held more honesty than any polished promise her ex-fiancé had ever given her. And though her hands trembled, Claire felt something unfamiliar yet comforting when Jake gently held her fingers, warmth, steadiness, humanity. The wedding ended with stunned faces and hushed gasps. Claire didn't care anymore. She simply felt free. It wasn't the wedding she planned, but it was hers. Jake walked her outside with respectful distance, as though unsure if he was allowed to walk beside a woman like her. Claire noticed his hesitation and offered a small, grateful smile. He returned it with a shy one of his own, the kind that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Their first days as husband and wife were awkward and quiet. Jake lived in a small, simple house far outside town, almost a cabin, really. Claire offered to find a hotel, not wanting to intrude or cause inconvenience, but Jake insisted she stay. Not because he felt entitled, he didn't even take the bed, giving it to her while he slept on an old sofa, but because he believed she deserved stability, at least for a little while. Claire struggled with the sudden shift in her life. She went from planning a future filled with comfort and luxury to learning to live in a place with creaking floors and mismatched furniture. Yet, to her surprise, she found a strange peace in it. Jake cooked with genuine care, even if the meals were simple. He fixed the broken step on the porch the moment she tripped on it. He left firewood by her door on chilly mornings before she woke up. And though he rarely spoke about himself, his presence was gentle, his kindness consistent, his quiet acts of thoughtfulness slowly mending the wounded parts of her heart. But there were mysteries, too, things she couldn't ignore. Jake left early in the mornings and returned late, often covered in dirt or sawdust. He seemed wary when she asked about his work. Sometimes she caught him reading documents far beyond what she imagined a laborer might carry. Once, she discovered a sleek black keycard tucked in his jacket, a card with a company logo she recognized as belonging to a prestigious global corporation. He had brushed it off quickly, saying it was nothing. But Claire sensed there was much more to this man than he let on. The turning point came one stormy night. Rain hammered on the roof, and thunder rolled over the hills. Jake hadn't returned yet. Claire felt a knot of worry twisting in her chest. When he finally walked through the door, drenched and exhausted, something in her snapped, not in anger, but in fear. She realized she cared about him more deeply than she had intended. The walls she built around her heart started to crumble, brick by brick. Over the following weeks, their bond strengthened in ways neither of them expected. Claire discovered Jake's quiet humor, his love for old music, his habit of leaving notes for her whenever he went out early. And Jake discovered Claire's resilience, her softness, her strength even in the midst of heartbreak. Yet Jake carried a secret heavy enough to shatter the world she had begun rebuilding. One afternoon, Claire received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end introduced himself as a corporate attorney. He informed her, very politely, very formally, that as Jake Rowan's spouse, she was entitled to be briefed on certain financial matters. Claire was confused. The attorney continued, explaining that Jake was the sole heir and majority shareholder of Rowan Enterprises, a multi-million-dollar company with operations across the country. Claire froze. Jake, the man who slept on an old sofa, who owned 3 shirts, who fixed porches and chopped firewood, was a millionaire. Her heart raced as reality unraveled. Jake hadn't married her for convenience or status. If anything, marrying her had brought him more complications than benefits. He had chosen her when she had nothing left, no pride, no dignity, no wealth. He had chosen her because he cared. When Jake returned home that evening, Claire confronted him gently, her voice trembling not with anger but with hurt and confusion. Jake finally confessed, he had walked away from his wealth years ago, seeking a simpler life after his family's world became corrupted by greed and betrayal. He hid his identity to protect himself, and now her, from the chaos his name often attracted. He hadn't told her because he didn't want her to feel indebted or trapped. He wanted her to choose him freely, not the fortune attached to him. Tears filled Claire's eyes. Not because he hid the truth, but because she realized something profound, she would have chosen him regardless. Their embrace that night was the beginning of a new chapter, one built on honesty, trust, and a love neither of them expected to find in the ruins of their former lives. Claire and Jake eventually returned to his world together, not as strangers bound by a desperate moment, but as partners who had weathered storms, healed wounds, and discovered a love born from brokenness and rebuilt with hope. If this story touched your heart or reminded you that love can appear in the most unexpected places, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world.